Wade?
W-A-D-E.
Yes. All right. So, what got you involved in going into the newspaper business from a law background? What got you started or interested in that?
I'm a lawyer by trade. My father was a lawyer. So I grew up, never considered anything other than being a lawyer. And so I went to Vanderbilt Law School. And when I came out, I started practicing law, first with my father. Then I started my own law firm called Hooker and Willis. And one of my great friends was a fellow by the name of Eamon Evans, who owned the Nashville Tennessean. And his brother died, and his mother was concerned about who should be the next publisher of the Tennessean in view of the fact that Eamon was very young. And I took it upon myself to counsel with his mother and to suggest to her that Eamon should become the publisher, even though he was a very young man. And happily, she did make Eamon Evans the publisher of the newspaper. And then I was very much involved in helping him select the editor of the newspaper, who turned out to be a man named John Siegenthaler, who has become a very famous man in terms of the journalistic world. And ultimately, after Eamon sold the newspaper, he became, actually before Eamon sold it, he became the publisher of the newspaper, having been the editor for many years. And during that time, in which he was both, which Eamon was the editor, was the publisher, and Siegenthaler was the editor, from the very beginning, in about 1962, I became the general counsel of the newspaper, along with my law firm, which consisted of my brother and another lawyer by the name of Bill Willis, and another lawyer whose name was Al Knight. And both Bill Willis and unfortunately Al Knight have both died. But Al Knight became a real authority on the subject of the First Amendment. And Bill Willis was a first-class lawyer. And the Tennessean in those days was a crusading newspaper. And they were a Democratic newspaper, and they championed the cause of public knowledge. They thought that the public's right to know was a crucial charge, and that they had the duty to acquaint the people with the inner workings of government. And as a consequence, they became a highly controversial, and some would say partisan, Democratic newspaper that spent a lot of time trying to elect Democrats to public office, both at the national level, whether it was Jack Kennedy or Lyndon Johnson or whomever. They also supported Estes Kefauver, who was the United States Senator from Tennessee, and Albert Gore Sr., little Al's father, and Albert Gore Jr., who became an employee of the Tennessean and was a reporter for the Tennessean. During that time, in those early years of 1960, we had a lot of controversial matters. We got sued in a very, very famous lawsuit called McNabb versus the Tennessean. There had been a race for Congress involving the sitting Democratic congressman, a man by the name of Carlton Losa, and he ran for re-election, and there was a young man named Dick Fulton who ran against him, and we felt that the election had been corruptly conducted, that there was fraud in the election process. The Tennessean championed that. If you'll go down and look at the morgue of the Tennessean, you'll see this tremendous coverage of the Tennessean exposing this corrupt election. And ultimately it ended up with Fulton overturning them having a follow-up election because the first election was corrupt, so the statewide Democratic Executive Committee decided, and after they decided that they had another election, Dick Fulton was elected to Congress to replace this former district attorney and a member of Congress by the name of, as I said, Carlton Losa. Fulton was in the Congress for many years, and then ultimately came back and ran for mayor and was the mayor of Nashville for many years, all basically compliments of Eamon Evans and the Nashville Tennessean. It was like we were all young, was like Eamon Evans on the piano, and he let the rest of us play it. He gave us an opportunity to have a voice, and as I say, he made me the general counsel of the newspaper, and we participated in very frequently in vigorous fights in which the newspaper was challenged for its position one way or another. And as I say, we did have this very famous lawsuit called McNabb versus the Tennessean, where this lawyer who was involved with the election commission sued the Tennessean for libel for several $1 million. And we tried that before a jury and won the case. And it was a very momentous circumstance because it verified the right of the newspaper to do the kind of things we had done. We were very aggressive. We basically said that this fellow McNabb and others were involved in a corrupt process, and we did libel them. But the fact is, the jury felt that we were justified in our position, and they exonerated the Tennessean for violating the libel laws on the basis that what we said was factual. That was before the decision in the New York Times versus Sullivan case, in which they enlarged the rights of the newspaper vis-a-vis public officials and gave the newspaper a broader right with respect to the coverage of public officials and the law, so that if you're a public official, and it's now virtually impossible to sue a newspaper, you have to prove that they did what they did maliciously, and that it was not only false, it was malicious, and that there was no reason that they had no reason to do what they did. But before that became the law in Sullivan, New York Times versus Sullivan, we went before the jury in Davidson County on a much less elastic law, and nonetheless won before the jury. After all that, the Tennesseans supported me for governor of Tennessee in 1966. And that was a very, very hard-fought, vigorous campaign on both sides. Nashville Banner was very much against me, and for my opponent, a man by the name of Buford Ellington, who had been governor of Tennessee, and we took them on. And the Banner didn't want the Tennessean to elect a governor because they wanted to re-elect their own man, whose name was, as I said, Buford Ellington. The consequence of this was it was a gigantic newspaper fight. If you go back again and look at the morgue of the coverage of that newspaper, both from my point of view in the Tennessean and from Ellington's point of view in the Banner, it's colossal coverage. I mean, it was wall to wall. And it was a fight over political power, not only who was going to be governor, but which newspaper was going to elect a governor. And so that's a big part of the history of the Tennessean, and insofar as that political circumstance obtained. I then got into business between 1966 and 1970, and I ran for governor again in 1970, became the Democratic nominee. We had another one of these vicious campaigns in the primary, and I beat the crowd who had beaten me before, and I won the nomination. But the cleavage was so great between these two factions in the Democratic Party that the Republicans were able to get the dissident Democrats, those who had beaten in the primary, to vote for them, and they elected the first Republican governor in 50 years in Tennessee. And that began the circumstance that we now have, where Tennessee was transformed from a Democratic state to a Republican state. And we now have Republican governors, and the legislature controlled by the governor's office, controlled by the Republican Party, and the whole political climate of Tennessee has changed over that time, beginning and ending sort of with the evolution of the Tennessean. In 1960, in 1979, I was contacted by a fellow named Carl Ella, who owned a company called Combined Communications. And he wanted to buy the Tennessean. In the meantime, the Banner had been sold to a company called Gannett, and they owned the Banner, and Eamon Evans still owned the Tennessean, and Gannett and this fellow Carlella, who owned Combined Communications, wanted to buy the Tennessean, and he ultimately did arrange to buy it, but he also arranged to merge with Gannett so that Gannett would end up owning 100% of both newspapers. That circumstance was going to violate the antitrust laws, and so Gannett had to sell a part of their combined holdings in the Tennessee and the Banner to someone else, and so I put together a syndicate composed of a man named Irving Simpkins and a man named Brownlee Curry and myself, and we bought a 30% interest in both newspapers, and then I became the publisher of the Banner in 19 year was that
Was that still in '79?
1979, and I stayed there for a couple of years, and then I then sold my interest in it to Brownlee and Irby, and they went on and owned it for many years, another 10 years or however long it was, before it was finally closed as a consequence of the problem with making money in the newspaper business and having two newspapers, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. But we made a lot of money out of it, had a lot of fun, and I wouldn't take anything for my time as publisher of the Banner, and all for my time as the editor, as the general counsel of the Tennessean, and the vigorous political fights that we were in both circumstances.
Awesome, thank you. That answers the follow-up question I had about becoming the publisher of the Banner. All right, let's just talk about your time in Nashville. Like, how do you like, being a Nashville figure as opposed to maybe another city? What do you like about being involved in the Nashville media?
Well, I was a Kennedy man. Bobby Kennedy and I were great friends. I was very deeply involved in the Kennedy campaign in 1960. Jack ran for president. After Bobby became the Attorney General, he appointed me as his special assistant. I went to Washington, lived at his house for many months. I was there during the Cuban Missile Crisis and the fights with Castro and etc. I was deeply involved in what turned out to be very famous matters involving Jimmy Hoffa and the prosecution of Jimmy Hoffa, and then also in addition to the prosecution of Hoffa, I was deeply involved in a case called Baker versus Carr, which turned out to be the one-man, one-vote case, and I was involved with getting Bobby to get the Department of Justice involved in that case. And Chief Justice Earl Warren said that was the most important case ever decided by the Warren Court, because it said one man, one vote, and was a redistribution of political power under the auspices of the 14th Amendment. So claiming that the federal government had a right on behalf of the citizens of the state, who are also citizens of the United States, to intercede in a situation involving the allocation of political power based on votes. And so that was a very important circumstance, the Baker versus Carr case. And the Hoffa case, in which I was involved, and ultimately got Bobby to hire a man named Jim Neal, and he had he tried the case, had a hung jury. Bobby then tried to get me to prosecute Hoffa on the jury tampering case. Hoffa fixed the jury in that first case. I declined to do that and got him my father. My father became the lawyer for the Department of Justice and prosecuted Hoffa and convicted Hoffa. Subsequently, I then, that was in the 60s, and subsequently again I ran for governor of Tennessee, as I said, in 1970.
Okay. Do you have any just stories from times being involved in the newspaper that you like to share? Like any just really interesting standout moments or achievements that you like to, let people know about for future generations, particularly focused on journalists?
Well, Stigenthaler was and is a great journalist. He's, is now the founder of the First Amendment Center, which was financed by Gannett Corporation, and he has become an expert on the First Amendment, and Vanderbilt sponsors the First Amendment Center. It's a part of the Vanderbilt institution, and a very, very important vehicle in America, the First Amendment Center, really started by John Siegenthaler. And I assume, have you interviewed John Siegenthaler yet about this, or are you going to interview him?
Someone is, yes. I'm working with multiple people, but somebody will be interviewing him.
Yeah, he's at the heart of the matter. Eamon, unfortunately, is dead, and too bad, because as I say, he owned the piano. He's the one who put me in business, made me the general counsel of the newspaper, helped me run for governor. He also put Siegenthaler in business, made him the editor. And Eamon was a remarkable man, and a brilliant man, and he had the great good fortune of inheriting that newspaper. And his mother made him the publisher, and he served. He was a friend of the public's. That newspaper was conducted with the public interest in mind, and the essence of power is, are you going to use it in an intelligent and useful way? And I'm convinced that Eamon Evans was trustworthy with power, and he used it in an intelligent and useful way. Now, he had his critics because he was a partisan, but well, notwithstanding the fact he was a partisan, he was a fair and sensible man, and advocated things that he was convinced were in the best interest. And we were so deeply involved in the monitoring of the public situation that there were a lot of close calls in which you had to come down on one side of an issue or another side of the issue, and these close calls provoked deep conversations that in which we learned about the character of each other, and involved in our sense of responsibility and what direction we wanted to take the newspaper, and what kind of things we wanted to do and didn't want to do, what things we were going to fight for and what kind of things we were going to fight against. And this circumstance involved three men, all of whom were actually really four men, because my brother was involved in it too. His name is Henry Hooker, and he was very much involved in it. And so there was basically Henry Hooker, my brother, and myself, Eamon Evans, who owned the paper, John Siegenthaler, who was the editor. The four of us basically were a small group of four who were great personal friends and had a common goal, a common understanding as to what we could and wanted to do. We had a lot of backup. This fellow Bill Willis, who was a member of my brother and my law firm, turned out to be Hooker and Willis, and ultimately Knight was also very much involved. Al Knight was a first-class lawyer and became a real scholar on the subject of the First Amendment. And so it was we were all immersed in it. It wasn't just a job. It was a way of life. It was a way of thinking. It was a 24-hour-a-day partnership to try to do something that affected the destiny not only of the city but of the state, and to whatever degree we could of the country itself. And as I say, it was born in the proposition that we all knew that so to speak, that Eamon owned the piano, that it was his vehicle. It was that gave us the opportunity to play and do our thing. But he shared it totally, and gave us all an opportunity to participate in the music, so to speak, and communicating with the public. Give me some time here, and I can think of some anecdotes involved us, because we had a lot of laughs and a lot of fun, a lot of stress. We championed causes, that some of which were embraced by the public in general, some of which the public didn't foster, and we had such hard-fought fights. The election for governor was so hard-fought. Election for mayor involving Fulton and Losa was such a hard-fought situation, And had it not been for the personal camaraderie of all of us, I don't think we could have ever done as much as we did. But it was based upon a teamwork partnership that enabled us to function as a team, speaking with one voice and effectively.
What changes in, say, the Tennessean and other, Nashville outlets have you seen in, say, the past 10 years?
Well, I'm disappointed to say that I've been greatly disappointed in that newspaper. The whole idea of corporate ownership of local press. There's a drastic difference between having a local owner like Eamon Evans and a corporation that's interested in that has publicly traded stock and is interested in the bottom line. It becomes a business. Eamon Evans didn't run it as a business that was determined to make money. It did make money, but that was just incidental. He ran it as a business that had a public function, whereas Gannett runs it on the basis of making money, and as a consequence, it doesn't have the same clout, it doesn't have the same energy, it doesn't have the same local flavor. It's not managed by people who own it. It's not managed by people who lived in Nashville. It's managed by people who are brought in here by a corporation who don't own the newspaper, and there's not that pride that we had in the newspaper, and nor is there the responsibility that Eamon Evans and Siegenthaler and myself had. We were identifiable local characters that were immersed in the community with many friends on both sides of the aisle, most of whom were Democrats, but many of whom were Republicans, and we were accountable to the people. Whereas Gannett is sort of this way off power that owns many newspapers, many television stations, and the like, and the Tennessean is just one of them. And it's run by people who have very little historic memory of Nashville. They don't really know what happened years gone by. They run it on a basis that is different from they didn't have the same mission, the same character, same identity. And it's frankly nothing like as good a newspaper, either from the reader's point of view or from the point of view of the oversight of government. It doesn't have the same influence with the people. It doesn't have the same facility to tilt one way or another public opinion, or to use the power to keep government from misbehaving, government from functioning from malfunctioning, as opposed to function in a more useful way. So there's a drastic difference between the local owned newspaper with Eamon Evans and John Siegenthaler and a newspaper that's run by people who are not Nashvillians and who don't have any of the background tradition of the past.
It's interesting you should say that, because it's almost exactly what this is about, getting that history.
Sir?
I said it's interesting you say that, because this project is about getting that history, the importance of that, these stories, the history of the Nashville, like you're saying, the historical knowledge.
Well, it's so important, the historical knowledge, and the Tennessean had an identity and a character and a mission and an ongoing relationship that and because it was locally owned and locally run, it had a different flavor than presently exists. And so, interestingly enough, Siegenthaler was very fortunate to have survived the change, because he had testified before the Congress in opposition to chain newspapers, and then ultimately ended up not only being the editor of the Tennessean, but then after the Gannett bought the Tennessean, Al Newhart, who was the CEO of Gannett, started the USA Today and made Siegenthaler the first editorial page editor of USA Today. Siegenthaler stayed there for several years and came back then, and went back with the Tennessean. And hopefully, and you say you will, interview Siegenthaler because he knows as much or more about it than anybody else, having been at the centerpiece of the transition of power and having worked in the context of the locally owned paper versus the corporately owned newspaper.
All right, and one last question. Any advice for people, future journalists, people getting involved in the media here in Nashville? Anything you think people should take away from listening to you? And
well, I've been a lawyer in my life, and I think that's a very important function. Lawyers have the opportunity to do public things in the public interest, to defend people and to represent people who need lawyers. And then I have been on both sides of the First Amendment. If you go back and look at the Tennessean, the Tennessean, no newspaper could have been more favorable to the candidacy of a candidate, than the Tennessean was to me, both in 1960 and 1970. But with equal vigor, the Nashville Banner was opposed to me, and they did everything they could. If you go back and look at the morgue of the Nashville Banner, you'd just be as shocked at the intensity of their anti-hooker publicity to try to keep me from being governor, both in 1966 and 1970, a matter about which they had a selfish interest. They didn't want the Tennesseans' own man, Hooker, who was a part of the triumvirate with Siegenthaler and Amon, to be in control of the state of Tennessee by having the chief executive officer be one of the principals in the Tennessean world. And so the Banner was brutal in their attacks against me, which were basically an indirect attack against the newspaper, the Newspaper Printing Corporation would own both papers. That was the entity that owned the both papers, because they had owned part, the Tennessean owned part, or before that, the Tennessean, the Amon Evans family, and Jimmy Stallman and the Nashville Banner were 50-50 owners in these two newspapers. So it was a unique experience to be in a position where the Nashville Banner absolutely tried to destroy me. I mean, they could not have been more vicious. Ultimately, one night, this newspaper that had been my enemy, all of a sudden, I owned a part of it and was the publisher of that very newspaper that had tried to destroy me. And that was the city room, the people at the newspaper who had worked for the administration, the scheme, and those who were in my opposition were all of a sudden confronted with the fact that they had a new owner, a new publisher that they had been very hard on. And I thought unfair with, but at any rate, hard. So I've had a good insight into what it's like to be on both sides of the aisle, what it's like to have the First Amendment give you the opportunity to own a newspaper, and whether you're a reporter or a newspaper owner or whatever, that First Amendment is a passport to stick your nose in other people's business. That's what the newspaper business is all about, sticking your nose in other people's business, or whether it's the government or whatever it is that you want to write about. And that's a wonderful opportunity, and you can do a lot of good by sticking your nose into other people's business, particularly public business. On the other hand, the First Amendment not only gives a person the right to tell the truth, but the First Amendment also gives you the right to lie. And once you get on the other side of that coin, where the First Amendment is used to lie about you, then you get the feeling of the full impact of the glory of the First Amendment on the one hand, and on the other hand, the threat it is to decency and to good government. It is a First Amendment cuts both ways. Asked Romney and Gingrich in Florida tonight, that First Amendment gives these super PACs the right to lie about other people, and that First Amendment is a blessed thing on the one hand and a very dangerous thing on the other. And so young people like yourself and people who are interested in going into journalism as a career, it's a fascinating career, and I encourage anybody who's interested in public affairs to consider the proposition of becoming a journalist. It is a slice of power that is different than being elected to public office, but in some ways, newspapers have more power than the public officials. They have the power to influence public opinion. And in many instances, whether you talk about the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times or the Nashville, Tennessee, or others, these newspapers have had a lot to do with the destiny of the country and the destiny of the local circumstances. And so I would recommend to the people who that are interested in public life, public affairs, to seriously consider a career in journalism. Same thing's true in some ways about the practice of law. The practice of law involves a situation where people are interested in public circumstances, represent one person against another, and etc. And so those two things are interesting to watch intermingle: the law practice and journalism and politics itself, which is sort of intermingling between all of us. So I would say to people your age and others who are interested in the destiny of the country, interested in the destiny of the state and the government and the local government, that they should consider running for public office, whether it's for the city council or mayor or governor or senator or president or whatever it is. And we've had in Tennessee here a rash of people who were in public life who went on to run for president of the United States. Estes Kefauver and Albert Gore Sr. wanted to be president. Albert Gore Jr. wanted to be president. And Howard Baker and Lamar Alexander and Fred Thompson and myself. If I had been elected governor of Tennessee in either 66 or 70, I would have run for president myself. And so that Tennessee has mourned a lot of people who were interested in public life, even at the highest level of running for president of the United States. And journalism is an aspect of that. I wouldn't take anything for the opportunity to have been educated by having been a student of journalism, an on-the-job training student that I got from my connection with the Tennessean, and then as a publisher of the Banner, and then as chairman of the board of a worldwide news agency called UPI. And that gave me a deeper insight into the function of the newspaper business and the function of the news business. It is at the core, it's frequently referred to as the fourth estate. You have the executive, the judicial, and legislative branch of government. Then you have this branch that's called the fourth estate, which is the people's right to know and right to participate in the fundamental notion of democracy, which is that we should have a country that functions with the consent of the governed, and the newspaper industry is so deeply involved with the consent of the governed, and the political power that comes from the facility to editorially and on the editorial page and on the newspapers advance the public careers of various public actors, and so I hope that the people that you know and who listen to what I have to say here today will deeply consider the intermingling of those things, the function of the press as a fourth estate, function of being a candidate yourself, the function of being a lawyer involved in the distribution of power and the litigation that evolves around public life. All those three things are highly rewarding. Been my great good fortune. I'm 81 years old. Been my great good fortune to have been involved in those things, for which I feel greatly blessed. And it really, in large measure, my life. Every time I think of Amon Carter Evans, who owned the Tennessean, it brings a sense of warmth to my heart because he was so kind to me, gave me my start, made me the general counsel of that newspaper, supported me for governor of Tennessee. He let me broker the sale of it to Gannett, made me the publisher of the Nashville Banner. And so Amon Evans, was my great sponsor, and for which I shall forever be grateful.